Afternoon, ready first team. My name is Major Jonathan Pinillo, and I'm the operations officer for 478th Armor. We'll be discussing area defense and always win. So looking at the references that we have before you, we're really referenced against ATP 3-90.5, the Combined Arms Battalion, as well as the FM 3-96 Brigade Combat Team, and lastly, the big one that we referenced against was ADP 3-90 Offense and Defense for those references that. And then we have the purpose of the area defense, or defense in general. The main purpose of the defense is to force or deceive the enemy into attacking under unfavorable circumstances, defeat or destroy his attack, and regain the initiative for the offense. Here are some key critical things that's a part of the purpose. So retaining a decisive terrain or denying the vital area to an enemy. Also treating the enemy or fixing the enemy as a part of prelude to the offense. And then countering the enemy actions and increasing the enemy's vulnerability by forcing the enemy commander to concentrate his subordinate forces in a particular area. The types of the defensive operations holistically is mobile defense, retrograde, and area defense. Specifically, we're going to be focusing on area defense, and that's focused on terrain. So the ability to deny enemy forces access to designated terrain for a specific time rather than destroying the enemy outright entirely. Characteristics of the defense we have here, I'm just going to highlight key things within the characteristics. So mass and concentration, so really focused on overwhelming the enemy combat power at specific locations as decided by the commander. And of course, looking at where do we want to determine and synchronize our engagement areas. Operations in depth, really looking at simultaneous operations and how we want to affect the enemy in depth, preventing the enemy from gaining momentum in depth as well. Next one in here is disruption, and really looking at the tempo of the enemy. What does that tempo look like? And we want to prevent the enemy from massing its combat power to a particular area. And then, of course, applying where the enemy move to into their desired engagement area that we want them to be in. Preparation, so of course looking at what type of intelligence collections and we're going to be gathering during the security areas, as well as the rehearsals that we prepare for and the survivability positions of the various battle positions that we want to prepare. So that'll be the primary, alternate, subsequent, supplement. And then we have the security. So security aspects to ensure that we have our security for our forces, providing protection, looking at deception, cyber, as well as electronic warfare and how we want to apply that, and determining what of our strengths and weaknesses are, and preserving our combat power throughout. Maneuver, we want to look at exploiting positions of advantage and looking for those opportunities in our maneuver. And then finally, the flexibility. So being able to be flexible in the plan to anticipate the enemy's actions based on decision points for the commander, and of course allow the commander to shift the main efforts as required and plan battle positions in depth and use the reserve forces as required as well. So this is going to be holistically tied into, for the characteristics of defense, tied with the architecture of the defense that Thunderbolt 6 will now describe.
As we just introduced the characteristics of the defense, we're going to transition into two topics that aren't necessarily defined in doctrine. One, being the architecture of the defense, and two, being the sequence of the defense. Those characteristics that Major Pinillo talked about can serve as a grade sheet for us as we design our plans for the defense. Do they acknowledge and include those characteristics? So as we build the defense, it's going to be divided into three general areas. So really from top to bottom, or north to south on this board, you have the security area, then underneath it you have the main battle area, and then you have the support area. Real quick, the security area is where the bulk of our security operation is going to be deployed. And this is not a reconnaissance operation, it is a security operation. So the main job here is prevent enemy reconnaissance by gaining any kind of contact with our ability to build our defense. So underneath the security element, the security area, is our main battle area. So this is where the bulk of our combat power is going to be dispersed in order to create our engagement areas. And this is really where the main battle is going to happen as the enemy approaches from top to bottom. As you can see from left to right, each element has their own AO with their engagement area, primary battle positions, and in this example, they have subsequent battle positions behind them to support any kind of disbursement if the enemy attacks from north to south. They meet disengagement criteria, and they have to move from their primary battle positions to a subsequent battle position. And finally, we have the support area. So inside of the support area, you could find the following things. For example, the task force or brigade reserve could be back here. You'll also find headquarters and mission command nodes, and you'll also find our brigade support area. So every element that's going to support the fight is going to be here. Our main battle area, where the main fight's going to happen, and the security area is where we're going to win the fight against the enemy reconnaissance. So there's the architecture. Let's just run through a sequence of the defense. These 7 steps are not always present, but common throughout the defense. They start first with, you have to occupy the area you're going to defend from and establish that security area. Then you're going to have number 2, which perhaps is the most important, is the counter-reconnaissance fight and our own engagement area development. Finally, next there's going to be a displacement of that security force as it meets a trigger to displace. We're going to be able to put in situational obstacles, and there's going to be a battle handover between the security force and the main battle area units. We're going to defeat the enemy in the main battle area engagement, and finally we're going to have to plan for and conduct a counterattack because the enemy will culminate, and we want to be able to take advantage of that. The 7 steps of engagement area development will be common throughout. We won't go through all 7 steps. It's important for us to recognize that we have to know those because that's how we're going to build the defense. And the most important, I'd argue, is right here, the rehearsals. If we don't allocate time to rehearse, we may miss key scenes that the enemy could take advantage of.
All right, so we're going to go into the task and purpose of this design that we have here displayed for you. So the task is destroy the enemy in the engagement area. The purpose is to build combat power in order to conduct the counterattack. We have 4 phases of the operation. The first phase is going to be preparation and occupation. Second phase is going to be conducting our engagement area development preparation and counter recon. And phase 3 is our defense. And then phase 4 is our counterattack. And lastly, we have the task organization that's designed here for you for the brigade. We have 6-1 Cav 136, 237 armor, 478th armor, 16 BAB, 23 FA, and 501st BSB in respect with their composite graphics underneath those maneuver units. On the eastern side of this entire board, we currently have the enemy in Avenue Approach 1 in the northern corridor and Avenue Approach number 2 in the southern corridor. I'm going to now display for you the security element of the enemy forces as they're making their approach towards the southern and northern corridors. And followed by that.
So as the enemy is preparing, we also are too, and we are transitioning from the offense. And this has got to be terrain-based as we make that transition. When we have achieved our offensive purpose, now we're moving into the defense. And one of the things that we have to do is first establish and occupy that security area. That's very vital because that helps us defeat the enemy's reconnaissance. So at the same time we're pushing out the security element, we have a decision to make in this phase, and that is, do we echelon our security? That means that we have 1 squadron forward in a screen, and in this example, we can put 1 company or company minus along phase line fireball to guard. There's 2 different purposes there. One is really to report, and the other is to engage. Because again, this security area, our focus is going to be defeating the enemy reconnaissance. I'll be followed by fires.
All right, in this phase, we'll be establishing OPs in support of the defense so that we can see the projected engagement areas, enemy approach, and any projected obstacles. We'll also be establishing PAAs and mortar firing points in order to also help us to ensure that we can range all enemy throughout the entirety of the defense.
So for phase 1, from a protection standpoint, really we're focused on 2 things, and that's getting the right amount of time allocated, which we're going to find out from the scouts that are doing the screen, and 2, making sure that we put our assets in the right place, whether it's combat configured loads of class 4 or engineer assets that are going to do survivability and counter mobility within the engagement area, as well as within the battle positions.
The enemy force at this point during the next phase of the operation, counter reconnaissance, and of course having our forces conducting engagement area development preparations. The reconnaissance forces for the enemy is going to start encroaching in our positions both in the north and the southern corridors along Avenue Approach number 1 and number 2 to then begin to pull information for their formation.
At this time, there's going to have to be direct fire triggers, engagement priorities, and engagement criteria discussed between a squadron and a guard force in this example. So who reports that we have enemy coming from east to west, patch that report to the guard force. That guard force in this example would engage and destroy this enemy reconnaissance. Now what that does is it just buys time and protects us as we're building the engagement area. So the security element, the security engagement is ongoing. We're building our engagement areas. And these engagement areas are going to be based upon our direct fire weapon systems and also the terrain associated. In this example, we'll have 3 primary company battle positions that will place direct fire into this engagement area. Now, within Combined Arms Battalion, you also have dismounted infantry. It's a very, could be decisive part of your organization. And so in this example, we'll put a platoon battle position up in severely restricted terrain to put our anti-tank missile weapon systems in the form of javelins up there.
We know where the engagement area for sure is. We're establishing targets to help channelize the enemy and drive them into those engagement areas. We're also refining our observation posts to better see eyes on the engagement area and the enemy approach. We're understanding that during this time, the enemy will be pushing forward and we will have to counterfire. We'll set up dummy fire positions in order to draw out enemy indirect fires, thus counterfiring aggressively on their indirect fire assets, negating their ability to attrit our forces with indirect fires.
So for phase 2, the engagement area development part of the operation, again, as we've already identified the engagement area, this is where our counter mobility assets are going to place, which we're depicting here as a fixed obstacle within the engagement area. The purpose of this is to slow down the enemy's tempo, maximize our time to mask both direct and indirect fires on the enemy. Also during this phase, we're beginning to stage and prep for movement back to the rear area in order to give security to the BSA.
As far as for the enemy force, the enemy now believes that they are being countered through the guard of our tank company in the northern section, northern corridor and Avenue Approach 1, that they have encountered the main body of their enemy force, which is our blue force. So in this case, now we have the main body is now going to be arriving into the AO. So in the north will be the assault element will be coming through the northern corridor, also supported by breaching capabilities that we want to certainly target. And then followed behind them is going to be the exploitation element. In the southern corridor on Avenue Approach number 2, obviously our reconnaissance assets would have been also defeated in the south for the enemy. We'll have the fixing element coming down Avenue Approach number 2 with some capabilities that they'll have with them. ADA as well as anti-tank capabilities in the south on Avenue Approach 2.
For phase 3 in the defense, this is where everything's going to happen, actions inside of the engagement area. But before that happens, we have to complete one of the most difficult operations that an armored brigade combat team will do, and that's the rearward passage of lines of the security element. This will typically happen during the hours of limited visibility. So the unit that's in the security area, 6-1 cab in this example, has got to have a really good plan, communication with the element it's going to pass through, and they're going to have to rehearse that. So there's going to be a trigger met, 6-1 cab will displace, they'll move through a lane in the obstacle belt, and they'll move back through the rear part of the main battle area to pick up orders and instructions from the brigade commander. Once that's complete, the company in the guard force in this example will do the same thing, and as it moves through that obstacle belt, it's got to close that lane to seal that obstacle. Now at this time, this engagement area is ready to receive the elements of the enemy as it comes down into that engagement area. Now this is where that we will combine all aspects, direct fire, indirect fire, rotary wing, fixed wing, and obstacles to place effects on the enemy.
The enemy is pushing into the engagement area. We're going to mass fires into the engagement area, taking advantage of the obstacle. So the obstacle is fixed. We're going to support fires on top of, around, anywhere the enemy is going to stop. We're also going to plan final protective fires in support of possible retrograde operations as the enemy pushes forward to press the counterattack.
From the protection and warfighting function for phase 3 defend, at this point in time, the engineering assets are all co-located in the support area. During this time, they're conducting survivability operations to dig in the BSA and make that as defensible as possible. Also, what they're conducting during this time is prepping for the reverse breach that's going to eventually have to happen prior to phase 4, which is the counterattack.
For the enemy in this particular event that's happening, now we have the enemy moving on the northern corridor down Avenue Approach number 1 into the engagement area. And that's going to be with these particular assets that can be identified and of course eventually defeated. At that point, the defense will then continue its action.
At that point, we will attrit the enemy, and that will be the trigger that we can move into phase 4, which is a counterattack. So conditions have to be set, the enemy will culminate, and then we'll have to send, in this example, a company back through the engagement area to conduct the reverse breach, as Captain Kaiser talked about, to move further to the east, and then achieve a counterattack objective to take advantage of the enemy's culmination. And so this will end the defense as we see it. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we'd just like to close with some final thoughts. Final factors when it comes to the area defense. First and foremost is time. It's the precious variable that we'll never get back, and as we transition into the defense, we have to understand how much time we have to allocate resources. Second is the combat configured load, or the CCLs. For the Combined Arms Battalions, as we go into the offense, do we have our CCLs with Class 4 ready to go as we transition into the defense to, as soon as we defeat the enemy on the offense, get ready to defend right away? Part of that is making sure we have the right assets to bring forward that Class 4 in our combat configured load. Reserve force planning. How big is our reserve going to be, and where are they going to plan for as we build the defense? What's their priority for planning? Which task force or company are they going to reinforce first? Class 5, how are we going to resupply? How are we going to put forth emergency class supply? Is it going to, Class 5 resupply, excuse me, is it going to be in a cache, or are we going to have something forward to support our combat elements? And really, how are we going to resupply Javelin missiles? Seams, the enemy's going to want to take advantage of these. How do we make sure that we close seams between units, between companies and between battalions? Spoiling attack, the enemy's going to launch this. It's going to happen as we prepare for the defense. How are we ensuring that our security forces are aware of this, equipped, and ready to defeat that? And finally, this is the opportunity for us to implement joint fires. Not only Army, but Air Force as well. How do we plan to make sure that we can have those effects on the enemy to attrit them before they even come into our main engagement areas? Thank you for listening to our presentation on the area.